All right, guys, welcome back to another episode of The Resilience Show. And I don't watch a ton of podcasts. I confess. I like doing them more than I like watching them. Shawn Ryan is one of the ones I watch a lot. That's one of the few that I watch. My favorite episode so far to date is my episode. So I'll say, no, I retract that. It's Sarah Adams' episode, and she's been my favorite. And then you just did a second one, and so we have Sarah on the show today, and I am super excited to do this interview just because I have so many questions that I want to answer for myself. So thanks for coming on.
Yeah.
But before we get going, I want to read your bio because I think everyone deserves to know who you are and why this is you're the voice for this topic we're going to talk about. Sarah Adams, aka Superbad. I like that. Is an award-winning targeting officer and global threat advisor with extensive domestic and international experience spanning the government, private, and nonprofit sectors. You were a former CIA officer, CIA counterterrorism analyst, and CIA targeter. Did I get that right?
Yep.
Okay. Probably not, but close enough.
Good.
Having worked extensively on the U.S. government's intelligence missions in Europe, the Middle East, North Africa, and South Asia. You were the senior advisor to the U.S. House of Representatives after being recruited as an executive appointment from the CIA. Presently, you oversee the DoD's R&D department, so research and development on projects that relate to national security challenges. So you are currently with the Department of Defense, which I'm thankful for them allowing you to be here and do this. You're also the co-author of Benghazi, the book here, which you can get on Amazon or anywhere books are sold. Know the Enemy, a cold case, open source investigation into the al-Qaeda terrorists who attacked the U.S. consulate and CIA annex in Benghazi in 2012. This book is not just your opinion. This is like from the investigation that you were advising on, correct?
No, this is actually our own investigation because the U.S. government didn't actually do it.
Okay, even better.
Yes.
Even better. So I had Mark Geist is a personal friend of mine, Oz, and he's been on this show. Benghazi, I know Hillary Clinton's quoted for like, let it go. What'd she say? Like,
what difference does it make?
What difference does it make at this point, right? Like, it still makes a lot of difference to me and to many Americans. And so definitely check out this book if you want to know what happened in Benghazi. You also hold a master's degree in international relations from the University of San Diego and a bachelor's of science in international business from the University of Central Florida. End of quote. Kidding. I had to do that.
Act shocked.
Act shocked, yeah. That about covers it all? That's kind of the wave tops?
Perfect.
Okay, well, awesome. Yeah, very, very impressive bio, and I know you've done a lot more, and we're going to get into some of it. But before we get going, I'm going to outdo our friend Shawn Ryan here, because I think all he gave you is gummies and a coffee mug.
Yeah, I got gummies. I don't even have a coffee mug, but I did get like lots of things with shrooms in it.
Yeah, you were worried. I was worried too, that the gummies, I'm like, what kind of gummies are these? Because he jokes, he says, like,
I know.
legal in all 50 states.
I asked ahead of time. I was like, don't give me gummies if there's pot in them.
No. Yeah, they're all clean, and I love the gummies. I think people that follow my social media know how much I love his gummies.
They are good.
But we have a lot of gifts that we do here, and we have Gator. So we have, I'll tell you the sponsors, first of all, that make this show possible. It's Smith & Wesson Firearms, Vortex Optics, Gators Eyewear, a stem cell company in Medellin, Colombia, which is an amazing place to go, called Bioaccelerator, and they do incredible stem cells. So if your body's banged up and you want to get a trip down to Medellin, Colombia, we could get you hooked up to go down there. We have a pharmaceutical company called BioPro. And they're amazing companies to make this show possible, as well as Allied Wealth Management. But today I got some shooting glasses for you from Gators. They primarily make glasses for men, but the shooting glasses are unisex. So here's some shooting glasses to keep your eyes safe.
Open up a new product line for women. I like the purple lenses, by the way, if you open up a women's line.
Well, actually, I could get, so those, we could get you some purple lenses for this, and they're awesome to shoot with. So I'll get you some clear lenses and purple lenses.
Sounds good.
With these.
Thank you.
And again,
wait, should I wear them the whole interview?
I think so. You look like super tactical.
Totally.
So
especially with the wrapper.
So Shawn was a little bit sexist and didn't get you a gun. So I said, we have to get Sarah a gun. So Smith & Wesson and Vortex sponsor this show. And so this is what I carry, the Smith & Wesson Equalizer. And if you want this same gun, which I carry, we'll get it to you. If you have something else in Smith & Wesson you like, we'll get it to you as well.
Okay, perfect. Yeah. Thank you.
There it goes.
Good. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah, we'll get, like I said, if you want that one, we'll get you that one. If not, we could pick anyone you want. Smith & Wesson will get it right to you.
Okay,
and
awesome.
You're in Florida, so.
Yes.
Florida's a big state. So.
Yeah, just don't give out my address.
Yeah. All right. Well, awesome. So, sorry, Shawn. I gave Sarah her first gun.
Yeah.
Courtesy of Smith
Great
Wesson.
job, Shawn. Great gift.
All right. So, ton of stuff I want to talk to you about. We kind of had some shared time in Afghanistan and Pakistan. So I'll talk to you about your operations in Afghanistan and Pakistan. I really want to break down the different terrorist groups in the Middle East and Southeast Asia that are currently still lurking around. Threats in our homeland. So many threats in America right now. U.S. taxpayer dollars funding terrorist groups. I don't think there's a better person to talk to about than you on this. And it's been something that Shawn and I have been working on, bringing some exposure to that. We could dig into your book. You could talk more about your book at the very end, so people could leave with that note of wanting to learn about your book. But I want to start off with how you got into the CIA, because every young man or woman that wants to do something adventurous and patriotic for the country is would think it would be a dream to be in the CIA. But you spent a career in the CIA and now still involved in that world. So how did you get into the CIA?
It honestly isn't that interesting. And I always tell people, so I just applied online and everyone's always so disappointed, especially during our era, right? When it wasn't as common. Now you have to apply online for every job.
No one walked up to you at a coffee shop.
No, which is so disappointing, right? Because then I don't have a cool story. But when I was in grad school, my focus was on Kashmir, which I wasn't really thinking through it at the time. And so when I went to graduate, I was like, oh, I did Kashmir. Where am I going to get a job? This is so useless, right? So the only two places really I could work is probably CIA and State Department. So the night I was practicing to defend my thesis, I went on the CIA website and I applied. So that was Halloween, and they interviewed me at the beginning of December. So it moved pretty quick.
Yeah. What would you originally apply for?
I applied for an analyst.
Okay. So that's where you kind of cut your teeth, and being involved with working with the CIA. I didn't know the targeting aspect. So you were not only a CIA analyst, but you were a CIA targeter. Can you explain the difference between those two jobs?
Yeah. Well, the funny part is, so the targeter wasn't on the website at the time, but as you know, when you go to the website, you don't know what the jobs are anyway. So I applied to analyst, and then the first week at the CIA, they put you in a room with everyone who was hired. And I was like, oh my gosh, I'm not like any of these analysts. I'm hired in the wrong place. So the second week you go sit in your office, and I go into my boss and I said, I think I'm going to resign. He's like, why are you going to resign? I said, you guys hired me as an analyst and this is not the job for me. I should be in the operations side. And so it was that day he said, well, we have something called a targeting analyst, and I'll just put you in that track. And then you can just be, a targeter for your career here at the CIA. So that's actually how it happened. I was actually going to leave because I didn't want to be an analyst.
What is that job? What makes it different?
Yeah. So the difference is really for an analyst, it's your standard. You are answering questions to policymakers. And so you kind of write reports and say, here's our assessment of what's going on the ground. It's a little more slower paced. And then a targeter, you're directly supporting operations. And most of the operations are you identifying a person. So it could be a capture operation, but it also could be identifying a person who can fill a gap, right? I don't know, some Iranian scientist who fills, a piece of information the U.S. government doesn't have.
Okay. When you say operations, are you primarily working with CIA's Ground Branch or JSOC? Who's doing these the capture kill type operations? Are you working directly with them?
Yeah. So basically, the day-to-day job, you work obviously with the case officers,
Sure.
But then if you move to an operational level, depending on where you are, if you're in a war zone, if you're in a foreign country, you might work with special operations or ground branch, or you might just work with that foreign government special operations.
Oh, really? I didn't even think about that side of it. Yeah, that's so we kind of crossed paths a little bit. I think we missed each other by 4 months.
Mm-hmm.
So I was in Pakistan. I was working in the federally administered tribal area, Afghanistan, on the Pakistan side. But I was on that side of the border, and I left in April of 2007, and you came there August of 2007 and worked that area a lot. I think till 2011 you worked that area. And so can you tell us, I don't know what you can or cannot say about the operations you did in Afghanistan and Pakistan as an officer or as a targeter, and to what type of operations you did to catch bad guys or capture or kill bad guys?
Sure. Really what my focus was, it was kind of interesting. I worked Pakistani militants, but it would be anyone who was utilized in some way by al-Qaeda. So what al-Qaeda would do is they would plan attacks in Pakistan, and then they would use local groups to carry out those attacks for multiple reasons, but mostly because they were more effective. So they would use Lashkar-e-Jhangvi was a very popular one, and that was my main group. And then they would use, Tehrik-e-Taliban Pakistan, which is TTP, and we call it the Pakistani Taliban. So that was primarily my focus. And then I got to a point where there was an opening in the Afghanistan shop, and they asked me if I would come take the position, and that was targeting the top 3 leaders of the Afghan Taliban. So that's when I switched over from targeting Pakistani terrorists to an Afghan terrorist. And so I did that for a year. And then after bin Laden was captured, Pakistan had stopped the visas for Americans. And so I volunteered to go back to Pakistan because I had a visa and they were short staffed. So that was my last trip, is after bin Laden's capture.
Wow. In that time, in my time from, being involved from the years I was involved, the terrorist groups seem to have rotated by name and by groups. Even though I've been involved in that, I still am confused on who some of these groups are. And this is kind of one of your expertise. So who would you say during that time were the top groups in that region that were operating? I mean, of course, the Taliban, but you talk about Al-Qaeda, how Al-Qaeda integrated with the Taliban, ISIS-K, how those interacted.
Yeah, those early years, it was really the priority was al-Qaeda. And then the priority was what was becoming the TTP. So the big target was Baitullah Massoud. Mm-hmm. So he, was one of the terrorists in Waziristan. And he's the one who ended up doing the Bhutto assassination. So Benazir Bhutto. So he was kind of the big player. And then al-Qaeda had certain people who they would assign to work with Pakistani militants or do external operations. And so those were the focus, as you can imagine. So one, his name was Sheikh Isa al-Masri. He was based in Lahore. And it was his job to link up al-Qaeda with the Pakistani militants. So that was important, obviously, since we were based in Pakistan. So that was a huge focus.
I don't know if you can answer this or not. To me, Pakistan is not our ally, from my experience. How complicit is Pakistan ISI during the war terror, not present day, but back when, I would have been in Afghanistan operating and our troops were in Afghanistan operating, how complicit was ISI involved with terrorist attacks inside of Pakistan and supporting the Taliban?
Well, it's complicated.
Yeah.
Because ISI has different directorates, right?
Can I first let the viewers know, if you don't know who ISI is?
Yep. It's Pakistan's Inter-Services Intelligence.
They're CIA.
And it's their CIA. Yeah. Okay. And they're mostly famous for back during the Mujahideen era. And they had this really famous leader, Hamid Gol. And he's the one who worked back in the day with the pre-Taliban when the U.S. was still supporting the Mujahideen. And then he kind of went rogue and, Pakistan trying to rein him in. And then he started running it on his own. So he's the really famous, when people think ISI, they all think they're like him. And He was a one and done, right? I don't think anyone's ever been like that in ISI. So how ISI works, it's different directorates, right? So obviously the directorate supporting in Afghanistan's Directorate S. In Pakistan, to do operations, you have to do them with ISI, and we did it with the Counterterrorism Directorate. So there's different relationships based on where you are, right? So if you were working in Afghanistan, you're kind of anti-Directorate S because they're doing backhand deals supporting the Taliban in Afghanistan. If you're working in Pakistan, you need the CT Directorate to go capture the Taliban members in Pakistan. So see the issue that comes into play. So they're an uneven ally, right?
Sure.
It's they're playing both sides to get funds from the U.S. and then to obviously keep the Taliban at bay. But now Pakistan's in a tough spot, right? They're not getting our counterterrorism dollars anymore. And then the Taliban have pretty much also turned on them.
Yeah. So someone like me, a patriotic American who's not there in your world really understanding this, it's black and white to me. Why would we financially support Pakistan as ally while they're supporting the Taliban? And there's a much more complex answer than that. So what would the U.S.'s interest be in that?
The problem is when we went into Afghanistan, all the senior leaders, for the most part, either moved to Pakistan or they moved to Iran, right? Mm-hmm. So the terrorists we're going after in Afghanistan were the next level down. So if you wanted to get the top 10 or top 20 of these terrorist groups, they were pretty much based in Pakistan, right? So you had to use Pakistan as an ally for that. So, we had a lot of success, especially against al-Qaeda external operations in Pakistan, right? We would not have been able to do that without the Pakistani government, right? Because a lot of that was, as you know, drone strikes. So, I think it kind of depends on what country you're working in and the view and what targets you're working on and the view. I think if you were focused on al-Qaeda, you might have a little more favorable view of giving money to Pakistan. I think if you're focused on the Taliban, you might have a less positive view. It unfortunately just varies on the topic.
When did ISIS kind of slide into the picture in Afghanistan?
I'm not exactly sure when they got into Afghanistan. I know, I worked in Libya, and they came into Libya about 2014.
And we, during the Trump years, I think we pretty much wiped them off the planet. Is that accurate, or is it political talking points?
Well, we did a lot of damage against their senior leadership in Iraq and Syria, but then ISIS obviously moved to other places. And Libya, unfortunately, was one of the places that got hurt really bad. Mozambique got hurt really bad. So, yeah, we were very successful in Iraq and Syria, but now ISIS is based in Pakistan and nobody's targeting them.
Yeah, so they kind of just reconverged, and that's where they are now. And is the Pakistan government addressing that at all?
No, they're not. So it's interesting. There's two kind of different branches of ISIS in the region. So the ISIS we all know from Syria and Iraq are based in Pakistan's Baluchistan, and Pakistan has not struck them yet. And then there's the ISIS Khorasan province that, is kind of the flashy object right now because they did the Moscow attacks. Their headquarters is actually in Afghanistan, but the largest training camp is in Iraq side, Pakistan. And again, Pakistan has not struck that location. So yeah, there's really nobody doing strikes against ISIS. I mean, Taliban will say they killed an ISIS member here and there, but they haven't taken out any senior useful ISIS member. That's just, half those people, they lie and say they're ISIS.
Sure. I want to go back to Afghanistan, but before I do, I want to kind of shift to the United States. Attacks in the U.S., every American is scared, should be scared of attacks in the United States. What kind of attacks are we looking at? We're looking at human attacks, infrastructure attacks, adverse nations, China. Like, what kind of attacks are we looking at in the United States?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like there's a whole spectrum if you open up that big. Obviously, with terrorism, there's two main focuses, right? So, like, al-Qaeda has a multi-coordinated attack in the works that they're planning for the U.S. It was supposed to be for 2025. It sounds like they got their attackers here earlier, so it could happen at any time. They're a little more focused on, almost like how they were with the World Trade Center, an economic target, right? We want a target that hits Americans' purse strings, so they blame their government for it. They hurt financially for a long time. Obviously, that had a medical effect, right? So many people had cancers and stuff. They didn't factor that in, but they saw the success of it. So Al-Qaeda's thinking that way. Then there's threats from ISIS, right? The different parts of ISIS. It could also be a multi-coordinated attack, but they want to focus mass casualty, right? So it's still a terrorist focus, but it's very different, right? It could be a beach, it could be a theme park, right? It's a little different.
This would they kind of inspire lone wolf?
And they're asking lone wolves, right? They recently just asked lone wolves of all things to attack White House staff and congressional staff. So ISIS put that request out. And then obviously when you say nation states, obviously they do things like cyber attacks, but I think the issue more isn't an attack today. It's what they take control of. So if we have a go to war moment or something, they can shut off our infrastructure or slow us down, right? Or make us unable to respond. I think we should look at an attack in that way. So it's almost like an insider threat because they're in here. I don't know what you call it, but it needs to be something like that.
Really just position themselves for game day. They could just, for example, the weather balloon that flew over, like I was really disturbed by that. I think a lot of people were. I mean, you have a Chinese weather balloon that leaves China, comes across, and it's just allowed to fly over our bases and stuff like that. Like, am I just a right-wing lunatic that I'm a conspiracy theorist that I'm so concerned about something like that, or is that a real concern?
Yeah, so they are collecting, right? But the sad part is it's like they're collecting around every major location now, right? In country. So the Chinese collection against our critical infrastructure, what you might call like a war go-to site in the country. Obviously, the control they're taking over in the ports. I mean, that's all very dangerous, but it's like we aren't honest about the impacts that could be.
Could they, like, if this weather balloon's flying over, could they do an EMP, shut down our grid?
I mean, maybe technically, I don't think that's the intent.
Right.
I think the intent was to collect probably on certain locations. And I think it was also just what China likes to do is they like to do an influence, in a passive way, right? So even if they did that and didn't collect much, I mean, look at how the American population viewed it. We viewed it as a weak government. We didn't trust our government, right? And it sows some dissent. And China likes to do that. That's why they amplify, political things we argue about in this country. People think things go viral because Americans care. Well, no, like China or Russia are pulling the strings and making a lot of that go viral. And it's not an accurate portrayal of what everyday Americans feel.
Particularly like TikTok, right?
Yeah,
they can really make things go viral on TikTok if they want to.
Mm-hmm.
Our southern border is a very hot topic right now with the election coming up. You got, Kamala Harris with the border czar, and all these numbers are coming out. Like, I've spent the last few years, I've spent a lot of time looking at it and looking particularly at fighting age males, no women, no children coming across. To me, very obvious Chinese militants, people from Syria and Iran coming across the border. How much have you really tracked what's going? I'm sure you have a lot in your job, like of those types of threats coming across the southern border.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot, as you said, coming across. I mean, there's multiple reasons why, right? Obviously, there just is more pathways open now, right? Because there's such an illegal movement up through Latin America. Like, those countries down there are giving, in a lot of ways, humanitarian visas to these people, knowing they're not staying in the country and moving to America, right? Like, they're enabling some of this. Like Ecuador, if you're Chinese, you don't even need to get a visa. They know they're going there to come north, right? So one of the big issues is these Latin American countries aren't really operating as allies to us. They're actually like supporting this invasion. And, they joke that Kamala isn't the border czar, but if her job was to deal with the root cause, she has not talked to any of these countries and stopped, right? We have carrots and sticks. We have economic relationships with these countries, and there should be no way people are getting visas to come to America through those countries because of the obligations they have to us on multiple levels. So that's an issue. Another thing that's really important, if you set the large number, I mean, the Chinese thing's a 6,000% increase. That's crazy. But even when it comes...
Can you say that again? China's 6,000% increase of
the Chinese males coming across the southern border. I mean, that's a huge number.
Yeah.
But another thing that happened is, so after the Hamas attacks, the terrorists kind of made an assessment. And when I'm talking about terrorists, I'm talking Al-Qaeda, Haqqani Network, ISIS, that, the U.S. is going to close the southern border, right? There was this border infiltration into Israel. Americans are going to kind of overcorrect. And so they pushed a bunch of terrorists forward. So those first 3 to 4 months after the Hamas attacks, very large numbers of terrorists came into this country.
Because they thought they had to up the numbers because we'd have a tighter border, but we never did.
Yeah, so this is our chance to get in. We need to get in now. And so a lot got in then. And I feel like people aren't being told that. There's no honesty around it. And then now they're all just positioned, to be a threat.
Well, I mean, if the White House really wanted to stop it, you call a country like Ecuador and say, hey, that annual humanitarian aid that we're giving, the money we're giving you every year, if you want that to keep coming, you need to put some criteria in place for Chinese people coming to your country, right? Like,
it's a very easy negotiation.
Yeah, I mean, we have, like you said, we have all the carrots and sticks. And what do you think the motivation is there? I guess there's two motivations. One in the White House not to do that. The other is on these South American countries allowing this. What's the motivation there? I
mean, I think part of the motivation is the economic value all these travelers bring, even when they come in for a short period of time. It's a lot of money. Also, what a lot of people forget is some of these movements cost insane money, right? So there's even a movement right now. It goes India to Benghazi to Nicaragua. Private plane the whole way, right? Like, these are very expensive movements too. And so it's not just Southwest airline flights bringing, refugees or migrants or illegals to these countries, right? There's private planes. There's big money behind the terrorist movements and some of these other movements to bring people to our border.
Well, clearly the immigrants can't afford it.
Right.
So who's paying for it? I mean, they always say follow the money, right? So who's behind this? Who's the they? We say they're doing this, they're behind this. Who are the they that's actually paying for this? And what's the incentive for them?
Exactly. I mean, they're saying that if you're being moved by like Al-Qaeda, Al-Qaeda, ISIS, and basically if the cartels know you're a terrorist, I mean, it's basically a $10,000 cost just to bring you to the border. But then that didn't include, obviously, your visas, your flights, right? Some of these people are going Iran to Turkey to like Brazil, all the way up. I mean, that's a long process to take care of people, to feed them, to get the visas, et cetera. So yeah, there is big money. I mean, some of these people are coming across our southern border here for economic opportunity. They're spending $10,000 to $20,000 to get in here.
Well, who's footing the bill though for that?
I mean, I know at least for the terrorist side, I mean, terrorist groups are funding the travel of their own people.
Yeah, it's speculatory, but why would the White House not be making every attempt to put a stop to this? I mean, clearly the info you're giving me right now is info that's making its way up through intelligence channels in briefings in the Oval Office. So if they're getting the same information, why wouldn't they say, my first and foremost responsibility as Commander-in-Chief, President of the United States, and our administration is to protect American people? Why would they not shut that down?
I think one of the problems you get when we're talking politicians and politics is they're not good at saying I implemented a bad policy or a bad change, right? And they made a change at the border, right? And that opened it up more. And so I think it's not wanting to go back on policy. You know, even in Libya, so after the fall of Gaddafi, we were supporting the Libyan government that supported Al-Qaeda, right?
Right.
It was pretty clear within the first year Al-Qaeda was involved in the prime minister's office and this and that. But it's so hard for our politicians to say, oh, we made a mistake in policy, we're going to change it or shift like we're seeing in Afghanistan. And they won't do it because they think it'll affect their poll numbers. It'll make them look weak. They don't want to admit a failed policy. So they actually lots of times continue failed policy.
When we talk about like shutting off the access of information of how to get in the country and people coming in our country, I heard you mention before that even TikTok like gives a full blueprint map of how to get to the United States. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, I mean, basically TikTok, like I brought up in Shawn's show, it's used like tech, you know? Right. You can use it to route yourself. So it can say, take this route or take this highway or maybe get a boat and go around this because there's law enforcement or whatever in this area.
Like Waze.
Yeah, it is. It's just like Waze, criminal elements.
Yeah.
And then it has all those extra things like, oh, if you need medical care, go here. You know, if you need food, shelter, clothing. And so like the whole time you come up through Latin America, you have these safety nets. So it actually makes you more comfortable doing it too. And it increases the number of people coming, right? Because, oh, the route's safer than it was.
Right. So many things I got to ask on this. So, I mean, you got human trafficking, sex trafficking, fentanyl, and all the drugs come across the border. But because of your background, I want to talk specifically about potential terrorist folks being in the United States. How many do you think in the last 3 years has made it into the United States? If you had to put just a guess number of how many military fighting age males that potentially terrorists in the United States that made it through in the last 3 years.
I think 1,500 approximately.
50, and those, I guess, what type of threat would that be? What are they capable of? How are they dispersing themselves? How would they position themselves for attack? What kind of attack would we be in threat of?
Well, first, when you talk about skills, right, there's different levels. So there's terrorists who've been terrorists for decades. They fought like in Iraq, et cetera. Those ones are very concerning, right, because they are hardened. They also have an emotional issue, right?
Sure.
They lost their brothers in arms in Iraq, right? They're a little more motivated. Then you have what would be like the new trainees and new recruits, right? Some have no training, like you might be ISIS follower and have zero training, right? They don't even care if you have training. And then Al-Qaeda, at least, you know, Al-Qaeda has a lot of training camps going on right now. Two of the key ones that are concerning is obviously suicide bomber training camps. They have 8 affiliated ones in Afghanistan right now. And then they actually have urban warfare training, which is kind of the similar skills we saw of the Hamas attacks, right? So those, I think, is the concerning part, right? Because Americans aren't used to suicide bombings per se or urban warfare attacks, right? So I think that's what we have to get our mind around. These terrorists are trained in ways that, yes, our soldiers seen, but everyday Americans don't have any concept of the capabilities and what they're willing to do.
Even our police forces.
Oh, they don't have the training. They haven't seen it, right? And so we need to really be diverting funds to get them the appropriate training, right? We don't want to leave communities at a disadvantage.
So if you have, 1,500 of these guys in the United States, they're waiting. They're waiting to be triggered. How would something like that play out? Is there just staging, waiting for the right moment to be triggered to launch an attack?
What I at least know about the al-Qaeda attack, because remember, there's multiple threats.
Sure.
Even with an al-Qaeda, there's multiple threats. But the main big coordinated al-Qaeda attack is none of the actual attackers know the target. They didn't want them to get caught up, like in secondary or something like that, or in questioning. So they'll be given the targets last minute. And that's it'll be in the urban warfare type of environment. So they don't have to do any extra training. They're trained to do what they need to do, if that makes sense.
By.
Yeah. Now, ISIS is a little different. They put out things, like weekly almost, right? Mm-hmm. Target transportation, whatever they ask. There's been a lot, obviously, for the Paris Olympics, right?
Sure.
Do knife attacks, do vehicle rammings. You can't do that. Do an attack with a drone, right? Yeah. So, it really just depends on who's targeting it. And then there's all the others.
Yeah.
So, we have terrorists that came here from the Islamic movement of Uzbekistan, right? Mm-hmm. IMU, you worked in Pakistan. I mean, we don't have IMU terrorists in United States, right? Like what are they intending to do? So there's a lot of other terrorist groups here now that really weren't here prior.
Right.
I know for years, Hezbollah's had a lot of businesses and front companies, and they make a lot of money in the United States, right? But I don't think people have thought through, okay, now what if there's trained attackers here? And there's a lot of things we have to prepare for in that case, just because these groups are a different level than petty street crime in the U.S., even murders in the U.S.
Right. So I want to use what we just talked about to speak to the audience a little bit, because I don't ever want the show just to be entertain people, right? What could the audience do on a personal level? I mean, they don't work in the White House. What could they do on a personal level to prepare for something like this?
I really think it's just the preparedness you would do for anything, right? Yeah. I live in Florida, so there's a lot of things you do around hurricanes, right? There's family emergency plans, right? Mm-hmm. And then there's plans, a lot of people make a family emergency plan, and then the father has all the roles. Well, let's assume he's also at work, and we make a second plan, yes. Right? I think another thing that Americans really could do that's so easy and they forget to do is just basic first aid training, right? Mm-hmm. Even for your kids, right? So you can respond, if a situation happens. Another thing is, if you're really concerned, I think it's important to understand if your law enforcement is aware of the terrorist threats. I've been to police departments and they don't get anything passed down to them related to terrorism at all, right? Some have said, we've never worked a terrorism case, right? They're getting tips at times and well, we can't work this. This is terrorism, right? So I think on the community level too, it's kind of what are we trained on? What is law enforcement's role and whose job is it to respond? I was talking about this recently, with Scott Mann. If you go to the DHS See Something, Say Something page, you can give terrorism tips. Well, depending on where you live, so if you live in Florida, you click Florida, and then it is by region, right? So I'm Tampa, Central Florida. And when I click it, it says I need to go to the Tampa Emergency Management Office is where I give a terrorism tip. That's the office that handles hurricanes. Obviously, if I send them a terrorism tip, they're not going to work it, right? So that needs to be fixed. So we need to be a little more engaged in where these things are being worked and who's responsible for them. Because, we make the joke, no one's coming for you. At the community level, you need to do your best to prepare. And you need to make sure not just your police department's doing drills, but, if you have a church, your kid's school, et cetera, they need to all be prepared.
Yeah. I remember when Columbine happened, all the police departments started training for active shooter scenarios. And, mm-hmm. But now today, the only people, I think it stops at the FBI Joint Terrorism Task Force, and then it doesn't, like you said, doesn't make its way down. And but on a practical level, like you said, churches and places that are going to be soft targets, terrorists like soft targets, where there's a lot of people, churches, schools, things like that. Those are at individual levels that the church elder boards could be putting together their security team and talking about stuff like this, and so should the schools. What level? At what level do you think every American has a responsibility to speak up on these things, to speak up and raise concerns in their communities and to their representatives, their state and federal representatives?
Well, I think everyone has a role, because after the fact, if you said, oh, I saw this problem, I saw this issue, but I didn't make the effort to bring it up, well, then you're part of the problem, right?
Yeah.
All of these people are in their job to work for you, right? And so if you're giving them stuff to do and they're not working for you, it also gives you a reason to vote them out,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And it's a way to make your community safer. So I do think people need to take more ownership of it. We had a lot of ownership of it after 9/11, and then it's kind of like fallen off the wayside.
Yeah.
People are back to, oh, I don't want to get involved again, or even people don't want to. They might get charged if they try to help someone in a situation. So it's almost like we have to shift back again.
Yeah.
And remember, this is your community, right? If you let something happen to your community, it hurts everyone. It hurts the entire resiliency of your community, and that has lasting effects.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey guys, 10 years ago, I had found myself in a position to where investing in Mighty Oaks and all the different things I'm involved in, I had found myself not prepared for retirement. And I went to my friend Ryan Wheelis at Allied Wealth. He had been a longtime supporter of Mighty Oaks Foundation. From the beginning, he's one of our first donors to Mighty Oaks, has been a friend for a long time, and I really trusted him. And he has helped me build my retirement and invest in my future through his company, Allied Wealth. He's one of the smartest guys I know when it comes to wealth management, and has taken money that I had stuck away in 401ks that was not really producing and made it produce tenfold. And I'm so happy with the results for me that I asked him to partner with this show, and he is a partner of this show now. And we want to not only let you guys know about Allied Wealth, but we're going to be doing some special episodes on wealth management with Ryan helping co-host them. I say co-host. I'm going to be asking him questions, and we're going to be providing you information on how to best manage your wealth. So if you're like me and you need someone to help you with your retirement, with your investments, with just your overall wealth management, go to alliedwealth.com and meet Ryan and his team to get you set up. Guys, I'm a lifelong athlete. I've tried all kind of things, from every different diet, from all different supplements, tons of different things to make my body as healthy and as functional as possible. I don't like taking just random supplements off the shelf. It just is either short-lived or just not good for my overall health. So I look for natural things that are actually bioavailable to my body. I heard about BioPro years ago from jiu-jitsu athletes, from UFC fighters, and they're all friends of mine who I trust that were telling me, you have to try a BioPro. And I did. I experienced a tremendous result, mostly in my sleep, to where I was sleeping 4 or 5 hours a night, to where I immediately went to sleeping 9 hours a night. BioPro has helped my recovery, my mental focus. There's a daytime formula. There's a nighttime formula. You could take one or both. I am a believer. I love it, or I would not be promoting it. If you're interested, go to bioproteintech.com and get yours today. Shifting back to Afghanistan, when did the withdrawal first hit your radar? I mean, the withdrawal is not something that just happened in 2021. It's talked about for a long time. When did that first hit your radar that our country was thinking about withdrawing from Afghanistan?
It first became really clear to me in January of 2010 that we wanted to reconcile, and that we were going to at least give some sort of shared ownership of the government to the Taliban. And I always thought that was so we could withdraw. So
2010.
Yes.
Wow. Halfway through the 20-year war.
Yeah. So the writing was on the wall for me then that was going to happen, and that the Taliban, I thought the Taliban would have a large share of the government, like 40 to 60%, which I didn't agree with, but I didn't realize it would obviously turn out the way it did.
Was this President Obama's view on, did he feel like that was the way to peace?
Yeah, he actually had chosen a special representative at the time. He's passed away now, Richard Holbrooke. And that was their goal, that this Taliban reconciliation was going to be the future. It was going to be the way out. And it was going to be, it was planned to be with the Taliban.
This is before bin Laden.
Yes.
So, I mean, essentially for me,
like the
war on terror, any president could have probably took the trophy and said, hey, war on terror is over, we win. But they didn't, including President Trump. He should have, in my opinion, declared the war on terror over. And we could have kept the presence there and represent the international community, participated with the international community there. But I believe we should have declared the war on terror a victory, especially after bin Laden was killed. So essentially, we're talking since 2010 to surrender Afghanistan to our enemy, the Taliban. You said you have my book, Saving Z's. I've been very outspoken on the withdrawal and my disagreements with it. For me, I believe that we should have never left Afghanistan. You may or may not agree with me. I believe that we should have left a small contingency there in the most strategic place in the globe between Iraq, Iran, Russia, and China, and led the international community to support the Afghan National Army, support and advise the Afghan National Army, support and advise the Afghan National Police to keep the Taliban at bay in those mountains of Afghanistan. So to withdraw for me was, I believe there was a disingenuous lie to the American people that we were leaving a war of 20 years when we still have 80,000 troops in Japan and 40,000 troops in Germany and 35,000 troops in South Korea. Like, those don't keep us in wars. They prevent wars to have those contingencies. So that's my personal opinion on that. But so as I was looking at this about June, I started going on Fox, June 2021, before the withdrawal. I started going on Fox and I was trying to really assess, like, I didn't want to speak out of my frustration as a veteran. I did 8 deployments to Afghanistan. My son deployed to Afghanistan. I lost friends there. I didn't want to speak out of my frustration for the withdrawal. I just really want to, like, from an investigative standpoint, like, why would we leave? There's got to be a motivation at why we're leaving so hastily. And the only conclusion I came to, and I said this, like I said, as early as June of 2021, is that the only benefactor of us leaving was China. There's 3 things that China will benefit from. One is the mineral rights to the Hindu Kush Mountains that they wanted. 2 would be to move sanctioned oil from Iran to China. And 3rd was to have the most strategic place in the globe, Bagram Air Base, between Iraq, Iran, Russia, and China. I believe all 3 of those have came true. Am I wrong on that?
Well, I think that's who benefited.
Yeah.
I really think the U.S., how all of our jobs work in the U.S., someone sits in a job for a year or 2 and they rotate. We don't really think in long-term strategic plans, right? China does, right? They can make a 100-year plan.
Yeah.
We have, hey, I'm out of this job in 6 months. I need to do X in 6 months to get promoted, right? And then the new guy comes in and completely changes it, right? So we don't do strategic planning, I think, at all. I don't think we even thought through what China was going to gain from it, honestly.
Right. So you think it's just coincidental that they benefit in those things?
Well, remember, so China and Taliban, they actually had the relationship in 2010. Okay. Back when I worked it. So China has always fostered this relationship with the Taliban, preparing for the day we leave, right?
Because they're thinking long term.
And so we then should have prepared for what China was going to do with Afghanistan. And we were the ones not prepared. China was well on the path when the withdrawal happened. They were ready. They knew the contracts they wanted to, pull. Like they were ready to move because they planned for it.
So instead of willful intent, you just say gross incompetence of lack of preparing or understanding.
Well, everything was gross incompetence. Remember, they waited till like August to even talk about how they're going to do the withdrawal, right? Exactly. I mean, it was really gross incompetence, at least in the way the withdrawal happened. Now, after that, you've had 3 years and it's still this way, like, there is, some major negligence going on. Yeah. There's support to terrorism going on. There's sanctions violations by our government going on. Like, there's actual crimes we're committing now in Afghanistan.
We say crimes that we're committing, crimes that our
government's committing.
Yeah. I want to talk about some of those. One of the things that's happened recently is, and I was just on Fox News this week about it, is the plea deal. The plea deal for the masterminds. Sheikh Mohammed. Us giving a plea deal to the masterminds of 9/11, three of them, and then one of the things I said on the news was, like, if President Biden didn't agree with it, then he needs to stand up, not hide behind his press secretary, and condemn it and retract it. And thankfully, Secretary Austin did.
Right.
But why do you think that it was even a factor in the first place? And
so I want to say like 5 or 6 months ago, this was really coming up as, hey, this plea deal is coming out, and everyone was getting pretty nervous about it. And really the game the lawyers were playing is, well, there's multiple problems. One is, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed was like waterboarded, and a jury's going to have a problem with that. Another one they said is, well, some of the information linking him to 9/11 or at least capturing him are classified. Will we get that information released to charge him? Like, they came up with all these excuses, right? And instead of the fact, hey, he didn't just kill, up to 3,000 people on 9/11, right? 4,000 more people died of cancers and ground zero injuries after. We had him behead Danny Pearl, right? He was involved in the Bali bombings, Mombasa attacks, right? Like,
push us into 20 years of war.
Yeah, there is no plea, right? Yeah. But it was like lawyers doing lawyer crap. And, years ago when I was on the Benghazi committee, our kind of like chief legal, he had worked on the Fort Hood shooting. Right. And if you remember, when the Fort Hood shooting first happened, they didn't do it as terrorism right away because it was easier to do it as something else. They legally made the decision, we're going to charge it this way because it's easier to put it through the court case this way. And then, as you know, the families didn't get the benefits. It had to be reversed and charged a different way. So it's almost like the lawyers being lazy instead of doing what was morally correct for the country.
Yeah. You talked about the United States doing actual crimes. Like, right now, one of the things that I've been just hot on, I know you and I both are friends with Shawn. We talked about it several times today, but Shawn and I have been trying to shed light on U.S. taxpayer dollars funding literally funding terrorism, and which is just so disturbing to me. And before we get back in Afghanistan with that, I just want to touch on Iran, because we have been giving money continuously to Iran for years. Is the money that U.S. taxpayer dollars that the White House is sending to Iran, is that making its hands in the Hamas and the terrorist attacks?
Yeah, the really thing I like to tell people, at least with the Iranian dollars, because they're like, well, show me the dollar moving from the government to the terrorists. It's like, no, when you infuse a government with billions of dollars, it opens up the other cash reserves so they can better fund Hamas, Hezbollah, Houthis, et cetera.
It's just business, right? You can reallocate money.
Yeah, they have more money. And that's the part that people get lost on, right? They want you to see the dollar bill moving. And it's like, come on, guys, like, be practical. All these groups have grown. Their capabilities have grown. Their access to weapons have grown. And it's because Iran had billions of dollars from our government. And it's an appeasement thing we do because of the nuclear program, instead of just ending the nuclear program so we don't have to give them any money, which is what we should do, because we're forcing the people of Iran to live under this regime because we give them so much money that people could never counter that, right? You could not come up with a resistance or rebellion in Iran that can get against $1 billion machine backed by the West. I mean, we're basically impacting the people of Iran by supporting the regime.
What does America get out of it?
They feel that they're stopping the creation of a nuclear weapon.
But we have the ability to shut down a nuclear program.
I mean, I feel we should just sabotage and destroy it and make sure it never happens.
Yeah.
Instead of every few months they get a little farther along. Are you joking?
Yeah.
It's like a bad movie.
It is a bad movie. It's a terrible
We're like
movie.
America. Who forgot that part?
Yeah, exactly. Like we could, no, you're not building a nuclear weapon.
Exactly.
Yeah. So Afghanistan, this is a big one for me. 40 to 90-ish $1 million a week of U.S. taxpayer dollars in cash going to the Taliban. Is that accurate?
Yeah, that's accurate. The really interesting part is a lot of people focus on the humanitarian dollars, which is the 40 million.
Yep.
But, according to people I talked to, when the plane comes weekly, depending on the weight of the plane, it has between 43 and 87 million, meaning there are weeks where if 40 million's humanitarian dollars, 47 million is given in pure cash to do counterterrorism operations. And it's like people focus on the humanitarian dollars, but it's that counterterrorism dollars that are going to the terrorist groups, and there's no accountability of it. And it's super dangerous. And it's an easy thing to turn off because obviously the Taliban is not doing effective counterterrorism operations. ISIS in Afghanistan has grown by 30%. Al-Qaeda is up to 50,000 members. I can't even believe I'm saying that, right? So there is no reason to even give them any counterterrorism dollars at this point.
Yeah, I mean, to me, and I know that they don't list the Taliban as a terrorist group.
Never have.
But the Doha agreement was agreed on that they would not support terrorism, which I felt was null and void from the beginning because they are a terrorist group and they have supported a terrorist group. If I, as a humanitarian that has done rescue operations in this, if I would go to Afghanistan to move an American out and I would give the Taliban $10, the DOJ would put me in jail for giving that money. I mean...
Yeah, they were giving people even a hard time about buying passports for Americans from the Taliban. It's like, hey, you guys are the ones who made the deal with them and made the government, right? Yeah. But the U.S. government can do it just fine and give them as much money as they want.
And they're giving it to them for counterterrorism, but in fact, it's funding terrorism. I mean, we were talking about the withdrawal. Again, we've left Americans there. We left our allies there. We left 40 million people to the hands of the Taliban. We left 20 million women and little girls. And I can never not mention that because these little girls and these women are women that were journalists and school teachers and doctors. And these little girls as young as 9 years old are now sex slaves. And we did that. And not to mention, I don't know the number. It changes billions of dollars in equipment that we left behind that we know is being used for terrorism. And now we're giving this money, this taxpayer money to them. And it's being kept quiet. They're not talking about it. And part of the pathway they're saying is through these NGOs. But these NGOs are not the same NGOs that have been there forever. These NGOs have been overtaken. They're just a shell of what they were. And the Taliban are running these NGOs there. And that's supposed to be providing the humanitarian aid.
Yep. Yeah. They basically gutted a lot of the NGOs or they just made new NGOs. But regardless, there's a law in Afghanistan now. Every NGO has to have a Taliban member on the board. So basically every NGO has Taliban leadership.
And so they're going to do it.
Yeah, and the
Whatever
other
they
really
do, right?
interesting thing is that always gets lost too is, we talk about aid, but there's also the World Food Program. So the World Food Program, their food is actually what is the food served at all the Al-Qaeda's training camps. So the World Food Program is feeding the terrorists being trained. That's how bad it is.
Yeah, it's so insane to me. We're U.S. taxpayer dollars, World Food Program, or paying for training, paying for the food, paying for logistics to prepare an enemy for another attack on us.
Yeah, it's insanity.
There's one piece that you mentioned, I heard you mention, and I want to actually put some emphasis on it because it disturbs me more than anything else. It shouldn't disturb me more than anything else, but I'm a very principled person. Part of our taxpayer dollars that are going in with this 43 to 87 million a week is what you said, right? Is mortar a fee for Taliban that we killed in Afghanistan. They go to the families of the Taliban fighters. Is that right?
Yeah, so there's a program that basically, if your family member died fighting the Americans, you get money, and some of the humanitarian dollars that we provide goes to the families of the martyrs. The other interesting thing is we also give money to the Ministry of Interior, and the Ministry of Interior also has a Martyrs program, and their Martyrs program is a little different, and they basically are trying to recruit you to come back to Afghanistan with your family so they can train the next generation. And in that one, you get a house, right? You get land, and you get $1,000 a month, just to come back to Afghanistan and carry on the terrorist tradition of your family.
And you and I are paying for that.
Yes.
Every U.S. taxpayer listening is paying for that. It's silly even asking you this question, but how's that fair to the U.S. service members' families that died in Afghanistan? Why was the mortar fee for them?
Yeah, it's like the ultimate betrayal. And I think that's why it's not being talked about, right? Because if the veteran community really understood that we're paying, right, for the families of the martyrs, like, you think they'd be all in their Congress people's office being like, stop the money now, stop the money now. There's very few Congress people, even in Congress, discussing this money. Like 90% of our Congress people are perfectly fine with us sending this money to the Taliban. That's a problem. Like, vote them out or make them do their job.
Yeah. If an American thinks that you and I are just making this up, where could they find information on that?
The best place always is SIGAR, right?
Inspector General for Afghanistan Review or something.
Exactly, yeah. So they do a lot of they've always done like the corruption investigations in Afghanistan. So they do at least the best job of the humanitarian dollars. Nobody's really talking about the counterterrorism dollars. And one of the big issues with that is the dollar amount of those counterterrorism dollars are in the annexes of the Doha deal. The annexes of the Doha deal are classified. So people are concerned about talking about those dollars because, like, oh no, am I going to talk about classified info? So basically, I went about it the opposite direction. So those dollars, those counterterrorism dollars, showed up with AQIM in Africa. I was like, where the dollars come from? And they said, oh, it was the Taliban money the U.S. gave them to fight ISIS. And then I worked backwards to it, and it ended up coming Kabul to Kandahar, et cetera, and moving to Africa, right? So we need to start talking about how our dollars are being proliferated to a number of terrorist groups. It's not just Al-Qaeda, it's not just AQIM, it's TTP, right? They had 800 attacks last year in Pakistan, their biggest resurgence yet. It's going to ISKP. I put a whole report out in May about how one of our 2012 Benghazi plotters takes the U.S. counterterrorism dollars to fight ISKP and gives it to ISKP in Pakistan. He moves the money to them. Like, that's how bad it is.
This is not hard to investigate, by the way.
No,
right?
It's not. I mean, I'm doing it on a shoestring budget.
Yeah. I mean, anybody, had access to the accounting behind this could be able to follow the money. And so certainly our White House has to know. You talked about ISIS dollars going through as part of the Doha agreement. Is there dollars that actually that we know that's going directly to ISIS, or
no? The dollars are supposed to be to fight ISIS and terrorism, and the dollar amount isn't classified. But that's the money we give to the Ministry of Interior that Sirajuddin Haqqani runs, and then the GDI, which is basically the CIA of the Taliban, and that's run by Wasik, who was released for Bergdahl. So that's where their money comes from. It comes from the Doha deal, and that's why we want to end the Doha deal to also end the counterterrorism dollars, because that gets forgotten.
The Doha deal, I know. I mean, first of all, if you get elected as president of the United States and you move in, you can't blame your last opponent. If you choose, you're like, oh, I only did that because the last the last president was doing it, so you could change, right? You could change trajectory. So I know a lot of times President Biden's like, I just continued on what President Trump was doing. Well, if you didn't like it, do something different. But President Trump has caught some heat for the Doha deal. What's different about it? I mean, was there a difference between the Doha deal that President Trump was working to what actually took place, or is it the same deal?
So it's the same deal. The biggest issue with the Trump side of the deal is he only negotiated the deal with the Taliban and left all of Afghan society out, right? Valid argument, and it really is the main reason the fall happened. Now, when you get to the Biden administration, the biggest part of the deal is the Trump administration put in real red lines, and the Taliban broke a red line, broke a red line, broke a red line. And the Biden administration said, yeah, we know they're breaking the red lines, but we just want to get out of Afghanistan at all costs. We are no longer enforcing the red lines. So those are the two issues between the two administrations, and the Doha deal is completely failed, and it is both fault, right?
Yeah.
And that even started before Trump. The reconciliation, like I said, started under Biden. Yeah. So it's 3 administrations of this Taliban negotiation.
Yeah. One of the things that I had pointed out, and I'm not sure if I'm correct, this is just from me talking to people inside the Trump administration, is that there would have been a support of a contingent international effort to support and advise the Afghan National Army. So I don't know if that would have been the case or not. But the red lines would have been, if those would have been enforced, we would not be where we are today.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure at least the way the Trump administration had done the Doha deal, they wanted some sort of leave behind. But again, they miscalculated in just doing the deal with the Taliban because obviously it gave no power to anybody else within Afghanistan when the deal went through.
The Afghan government that we spent 20 years putting in place.
And it's a betrayal. And a lot of them feel that betrayal, and now it then affects how they work with us and those type of things too.
How is this money, I want to emphasize, U.S. taxpayer dollars, being used by the Taliban to hunt down our allies that we left behind? Like intentionally hunting them down and going out and killing our allies because of what they did for America? Is U.S. taxpayer dollars being used for that? Yes,
it is. So as I told you, how U.S. taxpayer dollars are going to the Ministry of Interior and the GDI, okay? So what the Ministry of Interior is responsible for is they run the biometrics program that we left behind. So they're using those biometrics to help hunt down our allies. Then the GDI is the entity that then brings them in-house and tortures them or kills them, et cetera. And they're the ones holding the 3 Americans, to include Ryan Corbett, right? So yeah, those are the 2 main entities hunting down our allies, and we're funding both entities with U.S. taxpayer dollars.
Including those that have 3 Americans captive.
Correct.
Right now. Even if we want to keep giving them money, no more money till you give us our Americans, right? That should be a pretty simple phone call.
Should be, but remember, unfortunately, the GDI now is an ally because we're allied with the Taliban. So we're oddly allied in funding the people, like you said, holding the Americans. And it's a failed policy that no one will be honest, but it's a failed policy. We just keep going with it.
Right.
And remember, right now, our politicians don't think discussing Afghanistan or dealing with Afghanistan is advantageous. So that's why 90% of your Congress people aren't doing anything about it, because they don't think it'll get them votes. So you need to show up in their office and tell them, I will not vote for you, if you allow this to continue. They have to know this is an issue to people.
Yep. If you guys missed that listening, that is a straight call to action, every American. Let your member, your congressional member, your senator, know that this is important to you. That giving $43 to $87 million a week to our enemies and Taliban that are training, and we're going to get into that, for the next attack to the United States, that are holding American hostages, that are using that money to hunt down our allies, that are sexually enslaving women and children, that are using our tax dollars to do that. That's not okay, and you'll vote them out. That's the only currency that politicians understand.
I know.
Is votes. That's it.
Exactly.
They don't understand morality or what's right or what's wrong. And I have friends in Congress, so I know there's good people there. I know there's good people there. But for the large part, most people in Washington, D.C. and in any political office, the only currency they understand is votes. And you can't tell them you're upset. You can tell them, I'm not going to vote for you. And I'm going to tell everyone I know not to vote for you unless you take active, be boisterous in ending this. One of the things you talked about on Shawn's show that I really want you to touch on is the 8 stops that this money makes. That was really fascinating to me, and I'd love you to share how this money takes place.
Yeah. So remember how I said I went backwards from AQIM receiving the money? So AQIM, from what I know, but I actually only found out about the last few shipments. So I don't know how long those shipments were going there. But from those last few, that was $100 million US dollars to AQIM, like our dollars, our taxpayer dollars. So when we did the investigation to go backwards, we're like, so how did the money, right, get from the plane?
Yeah.
And remember, it wasn't humanitarian dollars, so it didn't go through the bank like the humanitarian dollars.
It's cash.
Right? Yeah. So how did it get there to Kandahar where it moved out? So obviously, I won't exactly say, how we figured it out. But basically, when it leaves the plane, the counterterrorism dollars do have, like I said on Shawn Ryan's show, 8 stops, right? Now, I'm not sure if I can remember all the 8 stops right now, but basically the first stop is the prime minister of the Taliban, Mullah Muhammad Hassan Akhund. He's just one of those original 6 people who set up the Taliban back in the day. The number 2 is Mullah Abdul Ghani Barater, right?
Which, by the way, I want to make a point. Like 3 years ago, we would have killed him.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, we're talking top 10 Taliban, right? These are U.S. targets. Yeah, like these names are known to anybody who served in Afghanistan.
You would have been a CIA targeter. You'd have been putting a team on him to capture or kill him.
Exactly.
Okay.
So the number 2 is Mullah Barater, right? Who did the Doha deal? Obviously, he's basically the deputy prime minister of the Taliban, and he's actually one of the key people right now that are interacting with Al Qaeda, with Saif al-Adil from Al Qaeda, with the Quds Force in Iran, because the Taliban and Al Qaeda are helping supplement like fighters in Iraq and Syria for to support kind of the Hamas regional fighting efforts. So he's very involved in that, besides supporting every other terrorist group inside Afghanistan.
So he's getting U.S. dollars to support all the terrorist networks in Southeast Asia and Middle East.
Yes, don't get me started. And then, I don't know the exact order. Another one of the deliveries then goes to the head of the GDI, who I told you is holding the 3 Americans. That's Wasik, again, released for Bergdahl. The next, basically, 2 go to Siraj ad-Din Haqqani. So one goes to his, basically, office, the Ministry of Interior, and then one goes to his residence. And again, Siraj ad-Din Haqqani is one on the FBI most wanted list for $10 million. So this is also a sanctions violation, right? That the U.S. could be charged for.
He's still on the FBI most wanted list?
And he has sanctions against him. Actually, Mullah Muhammad Hassan Akhund, the number 1, has sanctions. Mullah Barater has sanctions. Wasik has sanctions. And Siraj ad-Din Haqqani.
So we're sending cash to all 4 of them.
All 4 were breaking our own laws.
And so when you say breaking a law, I guess, can you explain what that means? Like,
let's say you have a company and you want to do business in Iran, but the company you want to do business in Iran has a sanctions against them, right? Because they have an affiliation with the Iranian government. Mm-hmm. So if you were going to do a business deal and buy, I don't know, computer keyboards from that company, you would be charged, right? Because they have sanctions against them, right? And the U.S. government deemed that's dangerous if you do business with them. So these people have sanctions against them, which means U.S. persons cannot do business with them, which also means the U.S. government can't do business with them. The interesting part is I've seen no waivers put into place for us to give money, let's say, to the Haqqanis, because also the Haqqani network is a designated terrorist organization. But one of the greatest examples of a sanctions violation that is chargeable is the Taliban made new currency. I don't know if you've seen it, right? They have Gulager's name on it, and they put a little more impostu. That was in English. Yeah. They printed that in Poland. The U.S. government basically gave a waiver so the money could move through SWIFT, right? This is sanctioned people moving money through SWIFT to pay the Polish bill for the money. Completely against the law. It's against U.S. law. It's against EU law. So again, there's actually cases we can charge against our own government for this. So yeah. So
who's responsible for the DOJ?
So the DOJ Treasury Department is who puts sanctions in place. Okay. And then Treasury Department should say this is a sanctions violation and then get the appropriate, it would be probably some sort of district attorneys to say, yes, we would charge X, Y, and Z in our federal court or whatever.
Yeah. Wow.
So then basically, those are the Taliban deliveries, and I hope I didn't miss anyone in Taliban. Then the money goes, so that's all kind of in Kabul.
Right.
Then the money moves to Kandahar, and this is where I found my AQI money. And when the money moves to Kandahar, it goes to the head of the Taliban, but then it goes to Al-Qaeda. So there's basically a delivery to the head of the Taliban, Hibatullah Akhundzada, and then it goes to Saif al-Adil, right, who's basically running the external operations of Al-Qaeda, and he's planning the U.S. homeland attack. And then the last delivery goes to the bin Laden family household, where basically 3 of bin Laden's sons live.
And it's crazy. So what's the bin Laden's role in terrorism right now? I mean, obviously, the father being Osama bin Laden, the three sons, right? Mm-hmm. Are they retaliatory for what happened to the father?
Yeah, so at least the U.S. homeland plot that Saif al-Adil is planning, it's directed by Hamza bin Laden, and it's the plot in honor of his father.
And so he has a plot to attack the United States in retaliation for us killing Osama, and we're sending him money.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because we don't follow our own money and watch where our money goes, and we send it in U.S. dollars. And then, so they basically say, oh, well, we don't know where the money went. Well, people found it out. It's not that hard to follow.
No.
Vehicles moving large chunks of U.S. dollars from an airport.
Yeah. Wow. Is that all 8? Yeah, that's enough.
Yeah, I think that we got all 8.
Yeah, I'm just trying to take it all in because that's just so disturbing to me, and injustice in general, like especially with stuff like this. This is, I mean, a lot of people throw the word treason around. This is treasonous behavior. I know treason is supposed to be tied to active war, but the war on terrorism is a war, and so to me, like, and this is my very strong opinion, this is treasonous behavior and criminal behavior on behalf of the United States government.
Well, when the U.S. homeland attack happens, and if it's successful, mm-hmm. there will be people charged, 100%. Yeah.
I sure hope so.
For aiding and abetting the enemy.
I sure hope so, but I hope it could be resolved before an attack. And so I know you've been tracking. Shawn had Ahmad Massoud on his show, which I thought was incredible of him to do. We had this petition going to try to get Ahmad Massoud before Congress. So Ahmad Massoud is trying to expose some of this from, just like you're talking about it. He's wanting to talk about it from the ground truth in Afghanistan. He claims to have information on a terrorist attack in the United States. For those who hadn't followed what we're talking about here, Ahmad Massoud Sr. warned the U.S. about a potential attack in the United States in 2001. We didn't listen to him. 9/11 happened. The towers fell. 20 years of war later, bin Laden killed Ahmad Massoud 2 days before 9/11 attack, assassinated him to really cut off our ally mm-hmm. and fracture our ally that we need to go after Taliban. And all these years later, all of our allies are being led right now by Ahmad Massoud Jr., who's leading the resistance. I call him Junior. I don't think they call him Junior there, but
I call him Lion Cub, so yours is a lot better.
Okay, yeah, the Lion Cub. And I mean, he is representing our true allies of 20 years, and our tax dollars are being used to fight him, to kill his people, to kill our allies. And he's still, which is amazing to me, right? He should be like so pissed at us, but he's still trying to warn us of what's happening there. He's trying to warn American people. He's doing the right thing, but yet he's been blacklisted by Secretary Blinken and our State Department from coming to the United States and testifying before Congress and sharing that information. And we get this petition going. By the way, with links in the bio on my Instagram. Shawn Ryan has the link up. You can sign the petition, please do. And it's just pushing Congress to hear him. But what's your position on Ahmad Massoud? What do you think he has to say? And is it worth Congress hearing it?
Yeah, the really interesting part is we want to bring Ahmad Massoud in and other people in the resistance, right, who have this information. So the U.S. government is currently aligned with the Taliban. So the policy is no support to the anti-Taliban resistance, which also means no relationship, right? So we don't actually have liaison relationships right now with the anti-Taliban resistance, which is crazy because these are our allies for 20 years. So it's not even just that they're not bringing these old allies in front of Congress. They're not even hearing them or discussing with them or collecting intelligence from them. Another thing they're doing is they're actually trying to counter them. So our State Department actually went to basically the leadership in the Tajikistan government and said, don't give a base to multiple parties in the resistance. Don't let them have a base in your country. If they have a base in your country, you're going to have a problem with us because we're not allied with them. We don't have a relationship with them. So the U.S. is actually undercutting the anti-Taliban resistance to where there's also concern in the veteran community. If I support let it be Ahmad Massoud and give him money, or Sami Sadat or General Zia, whomever, will I be charged in the U.S. for supporting them because the U.S. government is saying our policy is not to support them? So there is a lot of concern, and it's affecting their donations. So we do need to bring these commanders in front of our Congress from across the resistance to tell the American people what our government's doing to the resistance, and then to talk about the terrorists we're funding and then the threats that are coming. Because you have to remember, if our government isn't sitting down and meeting with them, they're not getting their threat reporting.
Right.
A lot of these guys don't even trust our government to give them the threat reporting because they're afraid they're going to hand it over to the Taliban. It's that bad.
First of all, I met Ahmad Massoud's number 2 on behalf of Ahmad Massoud in Tajikistan in 2021 when we were doing the evacuations, because we were assisting them getting the women and children out so that they could stay and fight. And so I could just tell you from firsthand experience, sitting across and having dinner with him and working with him, his authenticity of his heart to just fight for their people and protect their people is just so genuine, and they just want peace and they want freedom. And it's just heartbreaking that we would betray them that way. The allies that we fought besides for 20 years, that we betray them that way. What I can't understand is, even if they're saying what they're saying is not true, like you're from the intelligence community, you still want to hear you always want to hear what they have to say. You want to collect as much information as you can. So if you have someone saying, I have information on a pending attack on the United States, when did we ever not hear from someone that says they have a pending information for a pending attack on the United States? When did we ever ignore that?
Yeah, exactly. Well, it was in December when I found out our Benghazi plotter was actually making some of the IDs for the U.S. homeland attacks. No one has followed up with me on that, and I reported in December. So they don't even want to know this.
Yeah, so I've been getting a lot of some of the people that have pushed back, because every time I put something like this out, people push back, and I've gotten emails like, "Why does he need to come here? Why can't he just write an email to Congress?" Right? And it's like, he's afraid for his life, so he justifiably wants to be before an actual congressional committee, and that's and from your world, that should be justified, right?
Yeah, what people don't understand is you can write 1 million letters to these committees in Congress. It doesn't mean they're going to act. Now, if you put someone in a camera on C-SPAN and let all of Americans see it, then Americans get to know what's happening and Americans get involved. And that's why he wants to speak. He wants to come here and speak to the American people. He does think, the U.S. government policy is wrong, but he thinks the American people know better. And him and other people in the resistance want to speak to the American people. And that is their route to do it.
Yeah. Well, we support him, and I don't know what information he has. I don't know if Shawn knows what information he has, but whatever it is, I think the American people have a right to hear it.
Correct. Yes.
Yeah. So, man, Sarah, I could talk all day long on all this. I have so many questions, but I guess overall, it's kind of a closing question, and we'll talk about your book. But on this topic, a closing question: what should the American people be doing, whether they're, going to the Congress or speaking up or using their platforms? What should American people be doing if they're concerned about this stuff?
I mean, I think they really need to engage. The thing is, especially if we talk about Al-Qaeda has, it's just not a U.S. homeland attack, right? They want to do so much bigger. They want to do an Islamic caliphate. Like, one of the things that they're really focused on, and this is personal to me, right? I served in Benghazi, is they want to push the U.S. out of certain locations, right? So there are a lot of threats just against our embassy facilities, our military facilities. So if we just talk about in the last 2 years, every basically embassy or consulate attack I've heard of, this is all just Al-Qaeda, a planned attack on the U.S. consulate in Karachi, a planned attack on the U.S. consulate in Riyadh and the British embassy in Riyadh, a planned attack on the U.S. consulate in Jeddah, the British consulate in Jeddah, a planned attack on the Israeli embassy in the UAE. There's a potential attack on the U.S. embassy in Bamako, Mali. And then there's a current Al-Qaeda and Hezbollah plot in Beirut, Lebanon, which is believed to be against our U.S. embassy assets in some way. Not to mention, right, we just had the failed Houthi attack on a U.S. embassy branch in Tel Aviv. And last month we had that weird ISIS shooting attack outside of our U.S. Embassy in Beirut, right? This is an insane escalation just on the threats against our diplomatic community, not to mention what we're seeing in Iraq and Syria, which hardly is ever reported on. So there's Americans in real danger, not just in our homeland, but they're serving overseas to protect you, right? Like, you need to be a voice for them here, especially with your representatives.
That just leads me to ask this. What do you think? Why do you think the mainstream media doesn't report on these things?
I think they're influenced, right? They get political talking points. We joked about the border Caesar. They all read the exact thing, right? She was never appointed that, right? They are basically paid to influence, right? I mean, even if we just talk about Anderson Cooper, right? He makes what, 20 million? You don't make 20 million to read the news. You make it because you're a good influencer, right? You know, George Stephanopoulos, they're good at impacting you and influencing you. And that, unfortunately, is what the media is now. It's to get you to believe a certain way, to do a certain thing, and to react a certain way.
Yeah. Objective journalism's pretty much going on mainstream media.
Oh, yeah. And especially investigative journalism, it's gone.
Yeah. Yeah. So where can Americans go to get this actual truth that you're saying here, reporting?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the best things is podcasts. Yeah. And then what I always give people as a really good example is you always go to the closest reporting source of any incident, right? So if there's like a terrorist attack in Paris, right? Don't read it in the NBC News in the United States. Go find like the Paris newspaper, even if you have to hit the translate, and read it there, because it's going to be more accurate because it hasn't gone through the filters of what they want you to hear, how it needs to be projected in the United States. A really good example, like I just said, so the U.S. Embassy in Beirut attack, it happened last month, right? I mean, do you know the name of the attacker?
No.
Right. His name's Case Faraj. I would not find any American who knows his name. And the really interesting thing is he came to Lebanon as a Syrian refugee. His parents actually got paperwork for the UN, right? So there's this downplaying of his refugee status because it's obviously a hot issue in Lebanon, and it's a hot issue here. Even within the days after the attacks, the U.S. Embassy statement wasn't focused on potential ISIS lone wolf or whatever the attack was. It was like, don't take this out on the refugee community, right? So they're even just in terrorist attacks, we get influenced, right? And we try to teach people that because we learned it from our Benghazi attacks.
That's good instruction from a CIA analyst, because that's how you would do it at work, right? You go to closest source. Local
of course.
Papers, local journalists, eyewitnesses. That's, I passed this up and I want to go back.
Okay.
The Abbey bombing. Mm-hmm. We know that the suicide bomber at the Abbey was his name's slipping my mind right now, but he was a prisoner released from the Bagram jail. Mm-hmm. In the beginning, they were saying it was ISIS, it wasn't the Taliban. I'm like, it doesn't matter. They're all the same at this time. I'm not from your world to understand that they're the same. But if he made it to that gate, it's because Taliban let him make it to that gate.
100%. Yeah, actually, it's really interesting. His last name is Logari. It might have been called Logari, but don't quote me. So he was actually detained in 2017 in basically a joint operation in India as ISIS. He got moved to Bagram. We ran out of Bagram in the middle of the night. He was released that day. So he got released July 1st, 2021. He then obviously goes to Kabul to do this attack. Yeah, so he basically went through the Haqqani checkpoints. I mean, I know you understand this, but when we were doing evacuations in Kabul, like the gates were controlled by the Taliban. And then at some point, the Haqqani network came in and took over security for all the gates. But when the attack happened, Haqqani network now had control of all the gates. So the head of ISKP at the time, Sanaullah Ghaffari, his last job before running ISKP, he was the head of the Haqqani network for Kabul. And basically, Sirajuddin Haqqani said, hey, if you join ISKP, because I can't do attacks as a Haqqani network when this Doha deal comes through, I will let you use my networks and you do attacks for me. You can use a Haqqani network for ISKP attacks. It's a win-win. So Sanaullah Ghaffari joins ISKP, ends up becoming its leader. So when we talk about Kaya, obviously the attacker is dead, but there's 3 people solely responsible for that attack, right? There's Sanaullah Ghaffari, head of ISKP. There's a guy named Abdullah Omar Bajawari. He basically is ISKP's head of intel, but he was like the plotter that put all the pieces in place. And then Sirajuddin Haqqani, who controlled the checkpoints and allowed the bomber to go through. Anyone who says it wasn't a joint ISKP Haqqani attack is just lying to you. And they're doing what they did to the parents in Benghazi.
That implicates the Taliban.
100%.
Okay, yeah. So, and then, I mean, right when that happened, I'm like, okay, we're either going to blow up an empty warehouse somewhere or we're going to kill some poor innocent people to say we did something and we killed some poor innocent people. How did we, when we droned or bombed that family, did we already know who this guy was?
Did we know who the person was
actual attacker, the bomber was?
I'm not sure we knew who the bomber was. And unfortunately, when they bombed that gentleman, I mean, I think the info they had was it was like a white Toyota with with a bomb in it or something. I mean, you've been there. There's like a white Toyota every block. I'm like, that was your visual signature.
Every Corolla.
I can't even, as a targeter, however an operation got approved like that, I honestly think people should be fired for that. And we should hear from those people because there's no way you could justify.
We killed innocent people.
Yeah. But also, a white Toyota Corolla is your visual landmark. I'm sorry. In a city, I don't know. Like
in a city with every other car's a white Toyota Corolla.
Yeah. the fact no one was held accountable, obviously, for the HKI attack and this poor USAID worker. I mean, it's just crazy.
Yeah. Yeah. It's insane. Sarah, again, I could talk forever on all this. I'm going to be making notes after to do the same thing Shawn did to probably try to get you back. But anything else we didn't cover? We're going to talk about the book, but anything else we didn't cover on that?
Well, I mean, I think one of the things I want to bring up really quick about Afghanistan, because we always talk, I feel like people keep saying the same things about Afghanistan, right? It's like people talk about what they've known for 5, 10, or 20 years.
Yeah.
And we're not exactly talking about the current thing, right? Like my count right now for Al-Qaeda and affiliated training camps is 42 camps, right? I mean, maybe they had 5 in 2000, right? Like people aren't comparing the differences. The other thing is for the last 2 years, Al-Qaeda's gotten their weapons of mass destruction program operational. Like they're testing, right? No one's
in
talking.
Afghanistan, right?
In Afghanistan, the CBRN program is running, right? Where in our press is that being discussed, right?
Because so they have 42 training camps. They're testing weapons of mass, and we're giving them money to counter that. But it's growing.
Yeah, they got a chem bio program. No one's talking about. So I feel like people need to get with the times, right? Yeah. You need to figure out what Al-Qaeda is doing today, discuss Al-Qaeda as the threat they are today, and then do something about the threat that they are today.
Yeah. Well, it's alarming. I really hope that this doesn't get suppressed. I know that they like to suppress stuff like this. I don't understand why. But I really hope this gets as far and wide as possible and people that listening will actually take action and speak up. I want to cover your book because I want to make sure that everybody gets a copy. Benghazi, can you tell us more about what the book actually is? Like you said, it's an independent investigation into Benghazi. Can you tell us about it?
Yeah, I mean, I know how a lot of people got disappointed in the fall of Kabul. This is exactly the same thing that happened in our investigation. It was like a moral injury. So we were in Benghazi, and then for the years after, we just assumed our U.S. government was hunting down the terrorists who attacked us. I mean, you make that assumption, right?
Right.
After I worked in Benghazi, I moved on. So I was working the Iranian Ops Division. So I had no idea what they're doing in Libya. And then I left and went to Congress. So when I was in Congress, I came back to the CIA, because obviously CIA played a role in what we were investigating. And I ran into a guy, of all places, in the elevator that I know was like one of the smartest people on the Libya account, back in the day, like who I'd hire. And as people know, Sarah would not hire anyone. My standards are super high. And so he said, "What are you doing?" And I said, "I'm on the Benghazi committee." And he goes, "Oh, I wouldn't touch Benghazi with like a 10-foot pole." And I was like, oh my gosh, if like the best analyst in their department just said that to me, they're not working the attackers. So I left the building that day and I called Dave Boom-Benton from 13 Hours and I said, "Hey, I was in CIA and I've pretty much confirmed they're not going after our attackers." He's like, "There's no way that's true." He always has a very positive view that our government can do everything. And then I always disappoint him. And because, he's a Marine, and he's like, we all did the right thing. So anyway, that day we said, okay, we're going to hunt down. And our goal was we're first going to hunt down 20 Al-Qaeda members to prove to people it was Al-Qaeda. And then when we hit like 50 attackers, we're like, screw it. We're just going to find every attacker. So right now we're at 97% of the attackers at the U.S. consulate and the CIA annex. So we have 163 terrorists involved in just the U.S. consulate attack. And then there's senior leaders on top of that and plotters. And then we have identified the entire 10-man mortar team that shot the CIA annex and killed Glenn Doherty and Tyrone Woods. So yeah, we've been very successful in our investigation. The U.S. never even found one member of the mortar team on their own.
Does the book reveal stuff that kind of new to those who read like Mark Oz's book? Like as it revealed?
Yeah, well, remember, so my co-author wrote 13 Hours.
Okay.
So yeah, you're not going to find anything. So if you enjoy 13 Hours, start with the back of our book, because the back of our book is the timeline, and that's how people understand Benghazi, because of 13 Hours. So if you like 13 Hours, start the back, go through the timeline, and then you'll see, how we add the attackers into the timeline, because our book focuses on the attackers. Then our entire book walks through why Al-Qaeda planned the attacks, right? What was going on at the time. And it was actually a Libyan political problem going on at the time. And then it walks through who issued the fatwa, who were the commanders at the attacks, which terrorist groups were at the attacks. And then it tells you where those terrorists are today, right? Are they still alive? Are they at large? Were they detained?
Getting cash. Are they getting some of our cash?
Yeah.
Probably.
Well, for sure, one terrorist at this attack, his name is Faraz Shaku.
Yeah.
He was actually detained, of all things, this last fall for child rape. He was funded by the State Department the night of the attacks because he belonged to Blue Mountain, which was their contracted group. So he was paid by the U.S. government the day he was attacking us in Benghazi in 2012. So that is a fact.
Tragedy. Thanks so much for being so honest about all this. And one, thank you for your service to America. I know all the military guys get that, but they don't. People at large in the population of America do not realize like what people like you do for our nation every day, and because you're kind of in the shadows making stuff happen and allowing service members to be able to do their job. So thank you for your service to America. And it's an absolute honor to have you on the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Thanks.
Thank you.
All right, guys. Man, I hope you enjoyed that like I did. I have so much more. My mind's, I'm going to actually go back and take notes. My mind's spinning. I have so many more follow-up questions. But we'll see you next week. Hey guys, thank you for watching this episode of The Resilient Show. I hope you enjoyed it. If you hadn't already, please click subscribe so you don't miss any future content. We have so many amazing guests scheduled and you don't want to miss it.